Good morning, everyone. I'm Siddharth Shanghvi. Thank you very much for coming. I'm also incredibly nervous because my grandparents are here. I don't know which other author at Jaipur has the privilege and the extraordinary burden of being able to claim that as a reason for passing out, which I will do shortly. Welcome, Lou. Sanjay Roy has also asked me to speak for 6 hours, 32 minutes. So I hope you have a sleeping bag and some crystal meth on you. I know the resemblance is uncanny, but for those of you who are in doubt, Amy Tan is actually my grandmother.
He's perfect.
You just have to squint a little, you know, or you have to have one more bhang cocktail and then everything falls into place. Now, of course, what I'm saying is not a literal truth. I think it's perhaps a spiritual truth or a literary truth. And it's a kind of truth which composes great fiction, the fiction of Amy Tan. This fiction is fired by spiritual truth, free from the banality of accuracy. But it's also what makes her fine book so singular and enduring. They're distinguished by the experience of sadness, parting, loss, victory, reconciliation, and of love that is felt like a knife stab by each one of her characters. Even without knowing it, her characters enter us, and they become us. In her writing, she's referred to the idea of the Ouija board, beckoning a spirit to enter you, to inhabit you, to communicate with the dead, to answer personal questions, to find hope and resolution. But her books are like a Ouija board for the living, for our imagination and its harvest. Her characters are invited to enter you, to possess you, you, the careful reader. And they become you. They take some torn bits of a part of you and sew them into a fresh kind of wholeness. Now, before Amy and the rest of you gag with all this praise, let me remind you that Grantan is also a leather-donning rock musician. Her band, the Rock Bottom Remainders, was founded by the spirited Kathy Kamen Goldmark, who introduced us more than 10 years ago, and who I wish to remember and honor this afternoon in Jaipur. I know Amy because of Kathy, who passed away a few years ago. God bless you, Kathy, and thank you for the awful music. Well, they did raise $2 million in charity, so maybe the music wasn't that bad of a tamasha. Well, what more can I say? Here she is now, the author of classic novels, beloved children's books, a libretto, rock music's most dazzling dominatrix, and the woman who raised me on marijuana milkshakes. Please welcome the lovely and the legendary Amy Tan.
Thank you. Thank you. You're naughty. Can I ask
And I
something?
must add,
Really
Siddharth
cares. I
himself
have this
is an
done, I'm gonna get
award-winning
burned.
author. He told me to be very
thinks we
brief.
could
His
move
bio
this
is in the
slightly
big book,
over.
so read it.
Just move it in a little because I'm going to get burned here.
So would you move this out of the way and move Amy's chair? I think Amy wants to.
Because I'm right in the sun. I'm going to burn. Oh, okay, that's fine. That's fine. Okay, no, that's fine. Sorry.
Sorry, can you hear me at the back? No. Okay. I just like having you around.
I'm there for you.
Thank you. Okay, so now I can see the sounds reaching at the back. Amy, if this is okay with you, I thought we'd break up the talk in 3 different parts. One, I head an arts foundation, so I deal with a lot of artists. I'm very interested in process, how things come into being. So if you can talk a little about the process of writing. The second part of the conversation could possibly be about the book, The Joy Luck Club. And third part could be about your life that followed. Is this okay with you?
Yes, yes.
Okay, super. So, you know, Michael Ondaatje, who's at Jaipur, talks about how the image is a starting point for a lot of his work. What was the inception point for the Joy Luck Club?
First of all, I agree with Michael Ondaatje that it is, for me, the image that starts that, and the image is not a single image like a picture, but it contains a history to it. It's always evolving. But for the Joy Luck Club, I didn't have that sense of it. It was started off with a necessity. I had heard that my mother had died, possibly. She had a heart attack, and I went to the phone and I thought, what do I know about this woman? What have I not said to her? And it turned out she hadn't died, but I realized I needed to know about all the things I had rejected, and to start off with a question. And so in each of the chapters, there's actually an image and a question. It has to do with, the opening chapter, what have I lost? And there's a table with 4 sides, north, south, east, west. There are other images in each chapter, but they are always framed by this question.
Could you take us all back to the place that you were in life when you began this book, psychologically, emotionally, socially? What was the atmosphere like around you?
First of all, I was 33 years old, so I was quite late in coming to writing fiction. If you want to do the math, that was 33 years ago. I'm 66 now.
And I'm 12.
You're 12. He's my grandson, my grandest son, actually. So I was 33. I was a freelance writer, married for a number of years, owned our own house, had bought my mother a condo. I was really, really successful, worked 90 billable hours a week, and I was miserable because I found myself saying each day, what is the meaning of life? Making money, pleasing businesses. And so I sought to find something that would be meaningful. After consulting a psychiatrist who fell asleep 3 times. So I knew that I would not find meaning through a psychiatrist. And I decided to either do improvisational jazz or fiction writing, and guess which one won. I just started reading fiction again and found that this meaning was appearing to me through fiction writing, which is really to understand who I am and how I think of the world and how things happen.
Toni Morrison talks about how she's influenced more by other mediums than the novel. And she references that painting actually influences her more. What were your key influences other than books?
Well, it was the medium, the spiritual medium.
Really? So can you elaborate on that?
You said the Ouija board.
Right.
I didn't actually have to use the Ouija board after that, but as I was writing, I would think of my grandmother, who I'd never met before. She died in 1925, a suicide. And, but I thought of her in the past because to me, with every book, I think about how we are actually an evolution, a continuation of that person through the life that they went through, who they became in character, and what they found as the most essential part of themselves, and that it is in me. So consulting with my grandmother and then my mother for veracity in what I was saying.
And you said consulting with your grandmother through the Ouija board? Is that what you...
No. Well, that was my mother wanted me to do the Ouija board to contact my father.
Right.
And my brother, who died when I was 15, both of them, of brain tumors. And it was her seeking advice about what to do with these problem children, meaning me. And one of her questions had been, well, first she wanted to find out whether they loved us. Did they still love us? And then the other was, should she take me to Taiwan to enroll me in a school for bad girls? And I was the one controlling the Ouija board, so I went, no. This is early fiction writing, And then another question, very shortly after that, she said, what I should invest in, IBM or U.S. Steel stock? So now we had stockbrokers on the, in the pale. And I made up something or other. So that was actually with the idea that I was making things up, but I also had a feeling that I was communicating because I have had this sense in my life and have seen things in my life that are these people who have departed.
How successful were you with the stock analysis?
I did very well because my mother had quite a nice portfolio at the end of her life.
So I hope your friend Duncan Clark is here, is also taking notes.
Investment advisor, Duncan Clark. You know, we decide to consult all kinds of people who've died in major catastrophes, wishing them well. I will say also, aside from the, consultation in my mind or in my heart of those who have departed, it is also that I find inspiration in just about anything. So the medium of music, for example, inspires all kinds of stories in my mind, a continuation of a narrative. But I could see something happening at an airport, and that'll be the inspiration and idea for a chapter, even a whole story of how we see each other as humans. So it could be really from anything.
Was there a particular writing schedule or routine that you followed? I know that Vikram Seth wrote much of A Suitable Boy out of his parents' bed in Delhi. I don't think they were thrilled because it took him 9 years to finish.
He was following the model of Proust.
Yes.
I didn't have such models. That was the only time, writing at the Joylight Club was the only time I was regular in my writing habits, except for the very last book that I've just completed. My husband worked at a company called Intel, and he would leave for work and I would begin writing. And when he returned home, it was a very long commute. He'd return around 7 and then I'd stop.
Wow,
And
it's a full day of writing.
A full day of writing. And also, I had to turn in new work once a week to my writers group. So that was quite ambitious, and I thought to myself that later in life that was insane. So I would revise and then come up with a new story once a week. So that was a very good routine, which I've never been able to follow since then. Do not follow any of my advice on writing. It's either impossible or you will never finish a book for 10 years.
But, when you were talking, a brief segue about when you said you were referring to the writers group, was that quite instrumental in bringing the book to life for you? The fact that you had a deadline, you had to share this at the end of the week?
It was really, really helpful in the beginning because I had never gone to a creative writing course. I went to my first at Squaw Valley in 1985. And they were providing feedback as readers. And I discovered very quickly that what I had to do was choose the comments, not take them wholesale, but to feel the comments as whether they were true to how I felt about the story, and then to be guided by it. And the most useful comment would be things like, I don't understand, I want to know more, or I'm bored. And then where somebody will say, I think you should cut this part. That may not be the solution. It may be that I have not developed it enough or in an interesting way. So I took these things very seriously. I could not stay in the group after my second book because I had people who believed the book belonged to them as well. And I had another person who said that she thought the story was actually perfect, but she wanted to tell me things and criticize it so that I would not think she was intimidated by me. And I thought, this is no longer helpful. So that was the end of the writers group.
You live in New York and in California, but you write mostly on the West Coast. California has also had a great influence on people like Joan Didion, on a common friend, Amistad Maupin. What was it about the West Coast that works for you?
At the time, I grew up in the 50s and the 60s. And
you were born in Oakland, close to San Francisco.
But also lived a great deal of my youth in what's now known as Silicon Valley.
Right.
So at the time, most of the classmates, after I left kindergarten, first grade, which was a very mixed environment, a blue-collar kind of mixed environment, we followed the American dream, which is very much in evidence in California, especially during that period. The idea that you would increase your success, you would see success in the form of a better house. So you go from a tar paper roof house to the wood shingle house, for example, and those were hallmarks of success. But it was also a place of invention. So there I was in a classroom with all white kids, and a lot of these people had ambitions to improve their lives by home businesses. My father was one of them. He started a home business, and I think if he hadn't died, he would have been one of those Silicon Valley engineers who started a company. So to me, it was with the idea that you invent yourself. But there was an additional part of it. Being raised in California in the Bay Area, you were introduced to people with very liberal attitudes. And my father was a Baptist minister, so he had very conservative values. And in that sense, I was exposed to both and was able to later on decide what I believed, not to adopt any of those beliefs from others, but to weigh what I believed in and the reasons why.
But you know, when you were talking about California, if you allow me to add, when I lived there, what profoundly impacted me was just the natural life of how beautiful it is. You know.
There's that.
Yeah.
I've taken that for granted. Yeah, you mentioned it. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
But it was the beauty of nature. To live in San Francisco and to see this beauty every day and not take it for granted. You go across the Golden Gate Bridge, you see the ocean, you see the islands, you see the mountains. And that nature becomes part of me. You find a renewal in nature. And it is so important to me now. It is one of the major things that makes me happy today.
So I don't know about you, when you would have read The Joy Luck Club, but when I read it, I felt like I had fallen into a trance. I felt like I was trespassing into a dream. I was subliminally aware that it was a dream created by the writer, but there was a very trance-like entrance, because there are certain books that you have a psychological, intellectual, coherent response where you recognize the beautiful sentence structuring, you recognize the genius of the author at play. But with the Joy Luck Club, it was like entering like a very private dream. And I was wondering, did you draw a lot out of your dream life? Because, you know, I mean, we've spoken briefly about that because of my granddad's work and stuff, but did you, like, keep a dream journal? Did you draw from dreams? Was that something important to you?
Well, first, let me say I'm very flattered that you say it was like a dream, because one of the goals of a writer, when you think about your craft, is to create something that is like the endless dream, where they continue to read, they immerse themselves, and find them, the reader finds him or herself carried away by this, without interruption, without saying, there's artifice in this, and there's somebody who's taken their hand and written it. The other is that I've always been a prolific dreamer, and that I can remember dreams. When I started to write them down, it became rather troublesome, because I would remember 12 of them, 10 or 12 of them. And I would remember the last one before I woke up, and then I remember the transition that led into that, and I go back. I remember that, and it would take me all morning to write these down. And once you write something down, it's stuck in your head, and you don't quite remember whether this was a conversation you had in a dream or whether it happened in real life. That leads me to the question of when you remember, when you have experiences, do you count dreams as among those experiences of your life that matter? But one of the things that I learned in the dreams is that I could control them.
Sorry?
So I could control them. I could say to myself, I don't like this dream. I'm being killed 12 different ways. And I have to either recognize, sometimes I can't say this is a dream and I get rid of it. They're still shooting at me. So I do a device. It's kind of like the camera in a movie. I look down at my shoes, and when I look up again, it's a completely different scene. So this is like the chapter break.
Wow.
You know? And the other is that I've gotten whole stories, short stories, or the answer to a problem of where the story is going. One of the most wonderful dreams happened a couple of years ago. It was New Year's Eve, and I dreamt a whole novel, and it included the setting, which I never would have chosen as setting. It included the main characters and little conflicts and development and the relationships. I haven't written it yet. This is the next book I'm going to write. I've written it. So what happens, you've probably had this happen. You have this dream, you think, it's so profound. and you wake up and you start to write it down, and you realize it's ridiculous, or that it's, meaningless. But in this case, I wrote down what I remembered, and I looked at it, and it was a novel. So I now have the framework, the feeling of this novel with the ideas that I wanted to explore. But it's still going to be a lot of hard work. It's not as though you built the frame of the house and now all you do, you know exactly the color of the tile. You need to still go through all of that anxiety and the mistakes, the inevitable mistakes, and how you have to retrofit or remove things.
In a lot of your interviews, in your memoirs, you speak about the role of the editor and of editing. How did you edit the Joy Luck Club? And also please tell us about the role of the editor in your life, and in particular, your friend and editor, Faith Sale. Sorry, there are two questions, and I'm in a really bad conversation.
It's the morning, and I still have jet lag, so if I only answer one part, remind me of what the other is.
More coffee, please.
More coffee, yes. The first part of it is learning to become my own editor, which I already mentioned, that I was developing through the writers group. Part of that includes reading my work aloud, sentence by sentence, because you catch a lot of not only bad, clunky sentences, you catch what is false, what you've done as a writer to prove, I know this four-letter word that hardly anybody knows because it's in Latin, or it refers to some moment in history 5,000 years ago that you've never read about and is just passing. So you read those things aloud and you say, this is so false. This is not about the story. This is not about impressing people. The other is the editor that I had, the very first editor who I chose. I had several offers, and I said, I want to choose on the basis of the editor because I'm a new writer in many respects. It doesn't matter that this has been, they've chosen to publish this. And Faith Sale was the editor at Putnam. She was the editor of Kurt Vonnegut, of Donald Barthelme. Wow. Amazing, Joseph Heller. She was one of these people, however, who didn't stifle the writer by providing criticism and saying, what made you think you could write? And I've heard about editors who do that, who are so crushing. But this, Faith would pick out those moments where she would say, I think there is something there that has not come out that needs to be felt, what is felt in you. So what I learned about this, what is meant by felt, is to emotionally believe in what I'm writing. So it cannot be simply logic in the narrative or probability that these are inevitable outcomes of the story you have created. It is the notion that it has to be felt. And that is also the way that readers will believe something, because once they believe it, I could say anything. I could say that you fly and we're pigeons, at the end of the day. And as long as it's felt, people will accept that. I will accept that. I have an editor now. My first editor died in 1999, and it wasn't until a few years ago that I got another editor. I simply could not replace her. And I found somebody who was mentored by her, Dan Halpern of HarperCollins Echo Books. And he did the same kind of thing. He's so generous. He would write notes all over the manuscript. This is what I see. Here's the timeline. Here's something that I want to know more about. This is inconsistent. But he would really address the heart of the book. And that actually is in the last book that I wrote, Where the Past Begins.
Which is your new book out.
The new book out, which is a book about writing. And to me, it's a book about writing, imagination, and the intersection of memory.
Which started off as emails to
And a lot of people call it
Daniel.
memoir, which kind of disturbs me because it's not simply about the worst moments of my life. Dan's emails, since this was a book about writing, we included the emails during the earliest part of our relationship when we were getting to know each other, and I was trying to tell him what kind of writer I am. And he was responding to that. And as I wrote this novel, the Valley of Amazement, I would come up with these questions or these feelings of insecurity, and he would respond. And so you see that. And I've heard from people since then that this is a very rare editor.
Yeah.
This is somebody in the order of Max Perkins, who is also involved with your entire life and the emotional, daily health of your relationship with the world. He also loves my husband, and that counted a lot, in my mind.
And that is with good reason.
That's very good taste that he liked my husband. My husband, by the way, we've been together for 48 years. And in our first year, we had Siddharth. That's why it was a young marriage, slightly a little too young, but
Well, we're
that's
still
the
trying to
reason
work
why.
out an explanation. It doesn't ever
No,
sound logical, but
It is. He's only 25, so
do the math.
Too.
So let's move into talking really more directly about the Joy Luck Club. Hilary Mantel has this wonderful line, "The story of my childhood is a complicated sentence that I'm always trying to finish and to put behind me." Was this something that drove you to writing the Joy Luck Club?
The sense that I had was more that I was doing sculpture, that I was trying to create a form that was recognizable, and that I had to keep padding it out and adding things and then removing it and working on the eye. The eye, this does not have to do with mechanics of creating something. This has to do with what do I recognize as the pattern in my life? What do I recognize as me, as what is true in my relationship? It was also, when you talk about the sentence, it was not about finishing the sentence so much as revising the sentence. Revising basically how I understood my life. Because as more understanding came, as more was revealed, I would have to go back and say, that was my memory. And the memory itself is sound because you cannot deny emotions. That's how it feels. But now you have a different layer of what you know, and you have to add that on top. It was also seen in those sentences, contradictions, that I thought this is what had happened, and my belief on that was based on my sense of how it had happened or what had happened. Knowing this other information that was contradictory didn't mean that I got rid of the other stuff. It meant that I added that. And it was with the sense that contradictions can exist and be true as well. It's one of the things I find to be so true of my life, the nature of contradictions as part of me, the essence of having ambiguity, not ambivalence, but ambiguity, of having confusion. This is all good. Having damage, having problems. This is good for me as a writer. If I was healthy, if that psychiatrist had cured me of whatever was making me feel that, if he stayed awake, it had a lot of coffee and stayed awake. By the way, I had never been to a psychiatrist, and I really resented. I was paying him $200 an hour. You don't pay people to listen to your problems. I'm talking to you. I didn't pay you all to listen to my problems. I'm paying him later. So it was with this idea that in working out the stories, I'm discovering.
You learned that your mother had left behind 3 daughters from a previous marriage in China, and then you subsequently reached out to them. What were your conversations like? Because did they find any echo and resonance in the book?
When I found out that she had other children and she had a first marriage, it was so shocking to me because my father was a minister and they were supposed to be the paradigm of the perfect Baptist couple who was a shining example to others. And I learned about this. In my mind, I learned more about this after my father and brother died. So suddenly I discovered my mother was no longer religious and that she had this other life. Now my sisters it made me believe also that I had had privileges they had not had. And revisiting what my mother had said of, you don't understand if you were Chinese, if I had had a Chinese daughter, I recalled these things. I had a chance to meet these daughters. And what strikes me is very unexpected is the fact they have not expressed a lot of anger toward my mother. Even though they dreamed she would come back, they also believed that she was having this marvelous life in the United States, you know, square dancing or whatever every night and living in a mansion. You know, what was not true at all. My father worked 7 days a week, and my mother was, you know, a licensed vocational nurse. But that they didn't, one of them expressed that anger actually later, which I thought was understandable, because with this sense of abandonment, you have to feel that the love was somehow less, that was impaired, that, you know, how could a mother leave a child, a young child, at age 5, 8, and 11, and go off with a man she was having an affair with to the United States, and not being in touch with them for 30 years. She couldn't be in touch because the United States had cut off relations with China. Now I see this. I sponsored one of the sisters who lives in El Cerrito, near Berkeley, where you've lived. And the other lives in Wisconsin. She had been sponsored by her husband's brother. And she comes out and stays with us for 10 days at a time. I fly her to come over. And, you know, I would have hated that a number of years ago. But when you're a writer, you know, everything becomes, I'm not going to say material, it becomes part of life and your understanding, a greater understanding of the family that influenced you. And she's hilarious. She says things like my mother. The other one, the oldest one, has expressed that anger by taking the family house that we all owned, selling it, and keeping the money and not telling us. We found out about it ex post facto. And that was, on the one hand, I understand it. I've come to believe that a house, when it comes to inheritance, a house is the love you didn't get. And she didn't get that love. So I say, yes, you deserve the house. On the other hand, she betrayed us as family. So we are no longer family.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. So there are two questions that they are connected. I'm going to ask you the first one. In Suyuan, who is the only member of Joy Luck Club who does not have her own voice. The book commences with her death, and her daughter takes on a very lucid ownership of her mother's voice and story. Why was that?
I started off with the idea of this mother, Suyuan, because of what I had believed for just a moment that my mother had died. I had a message when I was in Hawaii, and it happened 4 days after this incident had occurred. The message on the voicemail was, Mom had a heart attack, she's in ICU, intensive care unit. So I'm getting this 4 days later, and I'm thinking, oh my God, she's died. I went to the phone, I was in a parking lot, I went to the pay phone, and I was dialing, and as I was thinking, it was sort of, what have I lost? What don't I know? How has she affected me? And then I said to myself, if she is alive, I will listen to all her stories. I really listened to those stories she told me 1,000 times that drove me nuts. I will take her to China. I will meet my sisters. I will listen to her advice. And I got to the phone, and they transferred me a number of times, and then I hear this voice, and it was, Inya, where are you? You know, I was like, oh my God, Mom, you're alive. And she said, yes, you know, and then she said, oh, you're worried? She was so happy I was worried about her. And then, you know, I said I was worried, and then she admitted it wasn't a heart attack. She'd gotten a pain in her ribs because she leaned over the counter to the fishmonger argue with him over something, and she bruised her rib. So that was a heart attack. But now I had made this promise. It was like the best possible thing. She didn't have any heart damage. She had a bruise on her ribs. You know, God, thank you, or, you know, whoever, Allah, blah, blah, blah. You know, thank you, whoever is out there. But now I had to take her to China and listen to these stories. And we had to sleep in the same bed. So it was 24/7 for 3 weeks. And her saying, why you buy these dirty things? You pay too much, you know, or eat this. Don't ask. It's nutritious things, you know. So this is all day and even in the night for 3 weeks. And I had to remind myself that I'm grateful that she didn't die. So, Su Yan, this is my mother silent. This is my mother if she had died. What would I have kept asking myself? Who I am as a person and what came from her. And when I was saying that each of the chapters, you know, it raises this question about my identity. That was my discovery of who she was and who she was to me. Because I recalled also when I thought she had died, I remembered something with absolute sadness. And that is that she had said to me not that long before, you know, she said, if I die, what would you remember? And I said, I remember lots of things. You know, I'd remember, I could only think she made great pot stickers. And I could hardly, you know, you told me these horrible stories all the time. You complain, you know, but I couldn't say that. So I just said, well, you're my mother. And she just got very sad, and she had a little tear in her eye, and she said, I think you know little percent of me. And I remember those words, and I was going to the phone, and I thought she was right. I knew little percent of her.
Well, but, you know, you had a very complicated relationship, which you kind of explore also in your memoir, and Where the Past Begins, which is out this year. You're at a writer's conference, and you're asked of a moment that you felt your life was truly in danger. Someone was out to kill you. Can you revisit your answer to that question at Squaw Valley?
I was at this writers' conference, Squaw Valley Community of Writers, and there was somebody doing a workshop on finding this story. And the story comes from these deepest, most conflicted, essential moments that you may have forgotten. So there was a question, for example, when did you tell somebody you loved them and you didn't really mean it? Or when was the time you were most frightened? So the question that came up was, recall a moment when you thought you were going to die. So there were 12 of us, we wrote this down, and he said, now you've probably written down you were almost in a car accident, or you went skiing down a mountain, a glass icy mountain, and almost died, which was the one I came up with. And he said, get rid of those. I really want you to think about what that means when you thought you were going to die. I wrote something again, and others, you know, again, we had our answers. We didn't even say what they were. And he says, I want you to get rid of those because they came to you so easily. I want you to really think about this question. And suddenly this moment came to me from the past that I had not thought about for 25 years. And it was the moment that my mother went a little crazy. We were living in Switzerland. It was after my father and brother had died of brain tumors. She was alone. She had no support. I was a kid who was rebelling. My brother was just quiet and withdrawn. And I came home, and I had a boyfriend who was 22, was a German army deserter. He was the father of a child to a woman he was not married to. He smoked. He had no job. He played foosball. He was very good at playing foosball. My mother did not think that qualified him for being an appropriate boyfriend. So when I came home, she had a meat cleaver in her hand, and she shoved me into the room, in the bedroom. She locked the door with a skeleton key and threw it off to the side, backed me up to the wall where there was a window overlooking Lake, Geneva. And she said, with these wild eyes, I'm going to, with the cleaver to my throat, I'm going to kill you, and then John, and then me. It's time. We all have to be with Daddy and Peter. I can't see you losing your life in this other way. And I thought, oh, she's exaggerating, but she's pressing harder. And she looked insane in her eyes. And I suddenly was overcome with a very sad feeling that we had come to this. She didn't love me anymore, that our life was in shambles, didn't have my father or brother who I was very close to. And I said to her, do it. Just do it right now. And it looked like she was going to do it. And I steeled myself to be very brave. And then I heard this voice. I don't know whether you'd call this a psychotic break. Your grandfather was, eminent psychiatrist. But I heard this voice say, I want to live. I want to live. And I felt so betrayed by this voice. And I don't remember anything after that. And I didn't remember that incident until 25 years later at this workshop. I burst into tears as I was telling this. I could not believe that this had happened and that I almost allowed myself, begged that my mother kill me. I called up my mother. Maybe I had remembered this incorrectly. And I called her up and I said, did you ever try to kill me with the meat cleaver? You were in Switzerland with the cleaver to my throat. And she said, oh yeah, you make me so mad. And I said, why did you stop? And she said, I don't remember. So that, this question of when did you think you were going to die had another layer of that it was not simply a physical danger. It was an existential one. It was one about the nature of who you were to yourself and to another person. That it had to do with one of the most fundamental questions you have at the beginning of your life in childhood, and that is if you are loved. So with the idea that she would kill me, it was also the end of love.
After the Joy Luck Club came out, and the book became this phenomenal success, and you were lucky to discover millions of friends of the book because of it. You were also criticized. The criticisms raised were that you were perpetuating racial stereotypes or for the misrepresentation of Chinese cultural heritage. Indian writers who are successful abroad are also sort of, laden with these kinds of baseless, stupid criticism. How did you respond to that?
Well, in the beginning, I felt I had to defend myself, and I was shocked, and then I discovered that a lot of writers were being criticized in this way, and then you look at the critics who were doing this, and that I realized that in the world of literature, that there were times we come together as a community, and there are times when we become factions. We become very territorial, or these other people would become very territorial about authenticity and what should be represented. So one of the criticisms was, why do you write about concubines killing themselves? This is, old stereotypes, this is mythology. And I thought, well, this is actually what happened to my grandmother, and I can only write the truth that is mine. I can't write about somebody who went to Harvard, and instead of the Joy Luck Club, they belonged to the country club. This was not our life. The life that had continued and become mine are the influence of. Why do you have this character speak in broken English and perpetuating this negative image? And I thought, that is the problem. That people think broken English is negative. Whereas my mother had many smart things that she said. She was perceptive, she was observant, and she could condense a situation down to its essence of what was true. Broken English had nothing to do with how smart she was. So I used to say things like that, but now it's like, I don't think that fiction should be representative. It would be impossible to do when you have so many billions of Asians in the world, or billions of Chinese or Chinese Americans. That's false. And if you would strive to do that, you might as well be writing propaganda. That is not truth in fiction. And so when people say that, we didn't and I would say this thing about, I don't think, and then I would say, if that is a novel you want to read, I think you should write it. You know, there are plenty of voices out there, and we need to hear from them. I cannot carry the burden of 3 billion, 10 billion. How many Indians, you know, do you have around the world? You know, Chinese is
Too many.
you know, billions. Okay, we're talking about billions of Asians, you know. I cannot represent all of them.
Sure.
I've heard from Indian mothers that they also tried to kill their daughters, but there's some commonality. But I cannot have that burden. And it's a false burden, you know?
So the last quarter of our hour, I thought we could gossip a little bit.
We do that back outside of this venue, lots.
A drink, I hope. So you had a rock band called the Rock Bottom Remainders. Your outfits could be best described as eBay dominatrix chic.
It's not eBay. I went to a leather shop in the gay district of San Francisco.
Oh,
A bondage
Sorry.
S&M shop, not
okay.
eBay.
So it's legit. This is like the real deal.
This is important,
Okay.
Siddharth, because you walk in, you're making a statement when you physically walk into a store and ask for these items, as opposed to being anonymous through eBay, you know, just send it to me.
So you were really prepping for the role. This is how brave you were.
Yes.
Well, what was your worst? I mean, your members included people like Matt Groening and Stephen King. What was your worst ever performance, and why was it?
Well, there's so many. How do you choose? There were many where I forgot my lyrics. I had two major songs. One was Leader of the Pack, and the other was These Boots Are Made for Walking. You know, the lyrics are not that difficult. And I had sung them for years and years and years, and I would still forget the lyrics. And when I forgot them, I would look at the boys, and they would laugh hysterically, which is what you need to have in a rock band where you're not really a rock singer. And those, after a while, they became part of the act, and so that became good. One of the worst was when I tried to sing well. In the beginning, you know, I thought, well, I don't have a voice, but I should practice and try to sound good and pick these ballads like Bye Bye Love. We got a review of that first show. We had 2,000 people who attended. Okay, so this was a big deal. And one of them who did the review was Don Henley of the Eagles. Okay, he was in the audience. And his review of us included, well, one person, it sounded like he was having a tooth extraction without anesthesia. The other was that we women sounded like alley cats on garbage night, and that we moved like we had white women's stiff libidos. But that was good. I mean, to be reviewed by Don Henley, we did...
However badly, it's a good honor.
This was good because what we did for many days is an exchange we did faxes back then among the whole band. We had Dave Barry, we had Stevie. You have to imagine the caliber of our evisceration of Don Henley, you know, which included having a mafia great uncle who would do certain things to him. Another was when, I don't know why, what possessed me. Instead of doing the hilarious dominatrix costume, I put on a pink outfit with a red wig, and you know, I thought it'd be really cute. And the person singing with us who I'd met was Leslie Gore, who sang the song, you know, It's My Party, I'll Cry If I Want to. So she's a great singer. She's legend. And there she is, and I start singing my song, and I'm horrible. And next year I realize how horrible I am, you know. And then after, I did put the dominatrix outfit on. At the end of the show, I had a Czech publisher say to me, I've been a very bad boy. I need to go to your hotel room. Because I did whipping. At the end of the song, the boys would bend over, and I would whip them, which is the way that people
That is not going to
remember.
happen on stage today.
No.
I promise you.
They would, you know, people would remember me as an excellent singer as a result of that. But
Well, Granton, can I tell them the story? So we were at a dinner, like I think a day or two ago, and somebody decides to take the mic and start singing at this very elegant dinner. And I'm like thinking somebody should call the cops. Like, I mean, this is just like And Amy looks at, she said, oh, this is so beautiful. This is Indian classical music at its best. And I'm like, she should be shot dead. Do you understand? It's like, this is the worst representation of Indian classical music ever. So you can only imagine how much fun they've had. Yeah.
This is a story. I won't know the other part, and I will forever remember, if you hadn't told me that, I will remember that as the highest example of Indian classical music. And in the story, I will not find out until way later, after I have done a number of things on the basis of hearing this and being inspired as though it's my mantra in life.
You know, speaking of musicians and actors, Steve Martin is a dear friend of yours, and I believe he's also a rad banjo player, and he has sometimes, as a friend, played the instrument for you. You know, I loved an introduction that he wrote for Annie Leibovitz on the photography book that she did. What is Steve Martin like?
You know, he is a banjo player. I would say of all the many things he does, he's an avid art collector, really, really amazing art. And that he is also a musician who's won numerous Grammy awards. So this is how serious, whatever he undertakes, it's done at a very high level, very serious level. He's a serious person. So you're expecting some goofy guy to go, you know, doing, you know, or something. But he's not. He's very serious. He can be ironic. He can be humorous. But he's not the way you see in the movies. He's also, you know, he's very generous in his time. About 3 weeks ago, we were in New York, and we were going to have a party last minute, because when I'm in New York, we don't often get to see all our friends at once if we're only there for 10 days. I had my usual party, which is Chinese takeout, champagne, and, you know, whoever, that's what happens. And I said to him, which I've said before, I said, if you want to bring your banjo, please do. And there are not a lot of people who say, I want to hear banjo music, so he's so happy, you know, and I knew he would play, and he did bring the banjo. He's also a serious writer. He's written plays, but he's also written fiction and memoir. So here is one of the things that I really appreciated from him as a friend, that I had written this memoir, Where the Past Begins. I felt horrible about it. I really hated that it was published. And there were many people who would talk about this book in a way that did not feel like what I had wanted to write. He would write me emails as he was reading the book. He listened to the book on audio. And he would start off saying, I feel that like you're telling me I'm the only person hearing what you have to say. Then he would write me another email. You're so right that everything in our life is like particles, and they're like physics, and they all come together in a certain way. And they'd write another one. I'm losing weight because I'm at the gym and I cannot stop my exercise because I have to get to the end of the chapter. Or, you know, and it was like 5 or 6 emails as he was going through reading, listening to this. No one did that. And then when we got together, he said things to me. I also said, I never listen to audios I've done. And I said, did I cry? He said, oh yeah, you did, yeah, many times. And I thought, because, you know, when I would cry, I would say, stop, I need to redo. And we'd do another take, like 4 or 5 times. And I said, do you have it? And they said, yes, we've got it. But what they did was they used the earlier takes where I was crying. And he said, no, crying is a good thing, and I cried in the recording of my own memoir. Oh.
So, you know, you have been distinguished by the fact that you have sneaked in your puppies into the White House.
Oh, not only that, the Supreme Court, to the Chief Justice's chambers.
So
yeah.
I can do that now, following in the footsteps.
Yeah.
So you've hung out with the Clintons a lot and supported Hillary actively. The Obamas have had you over a few times. What are your observations on either precedent? And I think I'm trying to ask a dubiously serious question, but what I'm really asking is, on the Richter scale of hotness, who unleashed the panic?
The panic, meaning Who would I act?
Between Clinton and Obama, who was
What do
like,
you mean by panic?
I mean, of like, you know, oh my God, somebody put on my chastity belt right now.
You know, I hate to say this because I don't think we should encourage, you know, sexual behavior of people, especially in presidents, and we've had some problems with that. So I do have to say that the position of president comes with it, with many people who have a fantasy of getting closer to that person. And there's something that is, there's an element of sexiness most people cannot buy, and that is that you're surrounded by 12 Secret Service men in dark glasses you cannot see. They have little lapels. They're like, and no one can get to them. And you're sitting next to the president, and his thigh is pressed against yours. And because it's so loud in the room, he leans on you and whispers, you know, you can't say, hi, you know, Siddharth, I love that scarf. You have to say, Siddharth, I love that scarf. You know, so that makes you a little weak. But I also, when you talk about panic, I think part of it is you're in such awe. And there are not a lot of people I'm in such awe that I'm not able to say anything. But when we were at the White House the last time, there was a state dinner. And we got the invitation very late, so I thought,
You were in the cabin.
we're on the Z list. You know, a lot of people, if somebody couldn't make it, will be seated in Siberia. And we got there, we're in the line, and Michelle Obama, I'm so glad you could come, you know, we're going to be talking to you. And I thought, oh, really? And I found myself seated directly across from Barack Obama. And I turned to, what did we do? How did we get here? And I said really stupid things. This is what you do when you're in awe of somebody. And we're talking, and he said, I hear you're in a band. And I said, yes. He said, what do you play? I said, the Dominatrix. And he said, oh. And I said, I sing Leader of the Pack. You're the leader of the pack. You should sing Leader of the Pack. And it's like, but you know, he was so cool throughout. He would say, oh, the person who was the Prime Minister of Singapore was there. And so again, you're so tongue-tied, you're thinking of things and they're all dumb. So I said, oh, I read this book by a Singaporean Chinese. It's called Crazy Rich Asians. It's amazing. It's kind of true. It's about all these people who have fabulous amounts of money and they just don't know what to do. So they get bad service at a hotel, so they buy the hotel. And then I realized that this is like one of the most powerful, richest Chinese person in the world, and that he is actually in the book. And he said...
And he bought the hotel he didn't like.
No, he didn't buy the hotel, but he said, he's listening, he says, and he says, that sounds fascinating. I said, yes. He says, well, I have to get that book. And I'm saying, yes, you know, I mean, what have I done, you know? I'll never see that guy again.
So how did you get to be on The Simpsons, and is it possible for you to be any cooler?
Matt Groening is how you actually pronounce his name.
Sorry.
Matt, it's the German, he says Groening, but he also says Matt Groening because that's how people recognize him. He's the one who created The Simpsons, and he develops the storylines every week or for all the movies. He was a friend because of the band. And we've known each other for 25, 26 years. One of our bonding moments was we were at a creativity private workshop with a bunch of people who we didn't know, but it was on creativity. And they said at one point we would be taking a hot tub in the famous hot springs or something like that. And I thought, hot tub? I'm over 40. I said, is this clothing optional? And they said, well, most people don't wear clothes. But then they said, well, if you really feel you must, like you prude, if you feel you must wear clothes, please go ahead. No one else will be wearing clothes. So Matt Groening and I are standing there in the locker room, and I just said, if you don't look, I won't look. So that was one of our bonding moments.
Okay, so the last question that we have for the morning is entirely self-serving. What is the best thing about being a grandmother?
This, you know, we've had many letters throughout the years, over very intense letters. And it was with the idea that we have not just known each other for 11 years, we've known each other for lifetimes. And that in many senses, we have this connection. Because I'm older, at one point he said, you're like a mother to me. And I said, no. If I were your mother, I'd say, don't drink, it's bad for your morals and your mind, and don't take those selfies where you show the brown nipples, it's not sexy, and you know, blah, 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 don't wear your anti-marriage clothes. I said, but grandmother thinks you are perfect, you're beautiful, everything you do is so smart. Grandmother wants to take you on adventures for the rest of your life. So I am his grand-tan, and he's my grandest son.
Ladies and gentlemen, Amy Tan at Jaipur.